Henry Lee Lucas is a name that haunts American true crime history, a figure whose legacy is shrouded in both infamy and confusion. He is remembered not just for his crimes, but for the hundreds he falsely confessed to, earning him the notorious title, the Confession King. His confessions sent shockwaves through law enforcement and the public alike, blurring the line between fact and fiction in the annals of American crime. Yet, among all the lies and fabrications, one crime stands out with chilling certainty: the murder of his own mother, Viola Lucas, a crime that would forever define his life and legacy. Unlike his later unverifiable claims, this was a brutal, personal act that marked his true descent into violence. It was a moment that separated myth from reality and exposed the raw, disturbing truth behind the man. Lucas would later claim responsibility for over 600 murders, most of which were debunked by investigators, but the murder of his mother in 1960 is the one act authorities could definitively pin on him. It is the only crime that stands up to scrutiny, the only confession that matches the evidence. This was not a random killing. It was the tragic climax of years of abuse and a twisted, toxic mother-son relationship. Their home was a battleground, and the violence that erupted was the result of wounds that had festered for years. Viola's death is the factual anchor in Lucas's otherwise sensationalized story, a starting point for understanding his darkness. It is the one event that investigators, journalists, and psychologists return to when trying to unravel the mystery of Henry Lee Lucas. Before he was a killer or a liar, he was a victim, shaped by the violence inflicted upon him from childhood. The seeds of tragedy were planted early, in a home filled with pain, neglect, and cruelty. To truly grasp the horror of what he did, we must first look at the environment that created him. The isolation, the poverty, and the relentless cycle of abuse all played a role in shaping the man he would become. The tale of his mother's murder is more than a single event. It's the echo of a lifetime of suffering, a story that reverberates through every aspect of his life and crimes. Sometimes the most monstrous acts have the most tragically human origins. In Lucas's case, understanding the roots of his violence is the first step toward understanding the man behind the myth. Henry Lee Lucas was born in 1936 in rural Virginia, a place where time seemed to stand still and hardship was woven into the fabric of daily life. He entered a world of poverty and chaos, where survival was a daily struggle and hope was in short supply. His father, a double amputee and alcoholic, was often absent, unable to provide stability or comfort. This left young Henry in the hands of his mother, Viola, whose cruelty knew no bounds. Viola, reportedly a prostitute, forced Henry to witness her with clients, shattering any sense of safety he might have had. She subjected him to relentless physical and psychological torment, making home a place of constant fear. She humiliated him by dressing him in girls' clothing and parading him in public, a calculated act that left deep, lasting scars on his psyche and sense of self-worth. The family's log cabin, lacking electricity or running water, was more than just a shelter. It was a daily reminder of their bleak existence, cold and unforgiving. Henry lost an eye in a childhood fight, a wound that set him apart from other children. He dropped out of school early, cut off from education and the chance for a different future, further isolating him from the world. His father's death from hypothermia, alone in the freezing cold, left Henry entirely at Viola's mercy. With no one left to protect him, their toxic bond only deepened. The outside world offered no refuge. Henry was marked as an outcast, shunned by other children, and left to wander the margins of society. This wasn't just a sad backstory. It was the soil in which future violence took root, a place where pain and anger festered, waiting to erupt. The seeds of his brutality were sown in a childhood defined by cruelty and neglect, shaping a boy who would one day become infamous for his own acts of violence. As Henry entered adulthood, the abuse he endured began to shape his own actions. He became a drifter, unable to hold jobs or relationships, turning to petty crime and alcohol. Early arrests for burglary landed him in prison, but incarceration only hardened him. Upon release, he was angrier and more isolated, gravitating back to a life of crime. Seeking stability, he moved in with his half-sister Opal in Michigan, but old wounds resurfaced when Viola joined them. Her arrival reignited years of resentment and abuse, creating a volatile atmosphere. The toxic dynamic between mother and son quickly overwhelmed any hope of peace. Viola's presence was a constant reminder of his trauma, and their relationship devolved into daily conflict. The pressure cooker of their shared history was set to explode. The events leading to murder weren't sudden. They were the inevitable result of decades of pain. The stage was set for a violent conclusion. In Michigan, Henry and Viola's arguments escalated, each clash fueled by years of unresolved pain. Viola's relentless criticism and Henry's simmering rage created a toxic, suffocating environment. For Henry, her presence was a living nightmare, a return to the abuse he'd tried to escape. Every insult and dismissal added fuel to a fire that had burned for decades. The final confrontation was triggered by a minor dispute, but it unleashed a lifetime of pent-up fury. Viola's verbal attacks pushed Henry past his breaking point. In that moment, he was no longer just a victim. He was about to become her killer. The argument became the tragic final act in their destructive relationship. The violence that followed was not calculated, but an eruption of pure rage. Henry had reached the point of no return. The consequences would be swift, brutal, and irreversible. On January 11, 1960, Henry's rage exploded during a final argument with his mother. He grabbed a knife and attacked Viola in a frenzy, unleashing years of suppressed hatred. The violence was extreme. He struck her repeatedly, then decapitated her, symbolically severing their toxic bond. The scene was one of utter horror. When the rage subsided, Henry was left with the bloody aftermath. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. The act was a brutal end to a lifetime of torment, transforming him from victim to victimizer. After the killing, there was no panic, just a chilling detachment. He left his mother's body in the house, a grim testament to the violence that had occurred. The decapitation was both physical and psychological, a twisted declaration of independence. This foundational act of violence set Henry on a path to infamy. The silence that followed was as deafening as the act itself. The victim had become the monster. In a chilling twist, Henry didn't flee in panic after killing his mother. Instead, he calmly left the house and went out for dinner. This surreal detail reveals a shocking detachment from the horror he'd just committed. For most, such violence would trigger guilt or fear. For Henry, it brought a strange sense of relief. He had finally ended his torment, and his first act was to satisfy a basic need: hunger. The image of him eating a meal just hours after mutilating his mother is haunting. It shows a man fundamentally broken, whose moral compass was shattered. Violence had become a logical solution, not a source of remorse. This dark dinner became a key part of his legend, a testament to his coldness. It was clear Henry Lee Lucas was beyond conventional understanding. Henry's calm didn't last. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, making every moment feel like borrowed time. Realizing he couldn't stay, he fled Michigan, leaving his mother's body behind in a desperate attempt to outrun the consequences. Each mile he put between himself and the crime scene only deepened his sense of dread. But his escape was short-lived. Police quickly identified him as the prime suspect. The investigation moved swiftly, piecing together the evidence he'd left behind. He was apprehended in Ohio 5 months later and extradited to Michigan, his freedom slipping away with every step. When questioned, Henry confessed, detailing the years of abuse and the final argument that led to murder. His words painted a picture of a life marked by pain and desperation. At this point, he was not yet the confession king, just a man admitting to a single brutal act, haunted by what he'd done. His confession provided context, but didn't excuse the horror of the crime. The courtroom listened, weighing his words against the evidence. The legal system now faced the challenge of punishing a man who was both victim and killer, a person shaped by trauma yet responsible for a terrible act. Henry's arrest ended his brief flight, but began his long journey through the justice system, where every detail of his past and present would be scrutinized. He was no longer a drifter, he was a confessed killer facing trial, his fate now in the hands of strangers. The evidence based on his confession and the crime scene was overwhelming. There was little doubt about what had happened. The question was not if he did it, but what would happen to him next. Would the court show mercy, or would it focus only on the brutality of his crime? The first chapter of his violent life had closed, but the story of Henry Lee Lucas was only just beginning. At trial, Henry's defense focused on his traumatic upbringing and diminished capacity for reason. They argued the murder was a spontaneous explosion of rage, not premeditated. The prosecution pointed to the brutality, especially the decapitation, as evidence of malice. The jury faced two narratives, monster or broken victim. Ultimately, Henry was convicted of second-degree murder, not first-degree, and sentenced to 40 years. He served time in Michigan prisons, considered a model prisoner by some. After just 10 years, he was paroled in 1970. The system believed he was rehabilitated, a decision with devastating consequences. After parole, Henry quickly returned to drifting and crime, eventually partnering with Otis Toole. He was later convicted of 11 murders, though most of his hundreds of confessions were proven false. Sentenced to death for the Orange Socks murder, his sentence was commuted to life due to doubts about his guilt. Lucas died in prison in 2001, leaving behind a legacy of pain and confusion. Was he a victim-turned-monster or a manipulator who played the system? The truth is disturbingly complex. His story is a cautionary tale about the cycle of violence and the limits of justice. From abused child to notorious confessor, Lucas forces us to confront the darkness within the human heart. If you found this story compelling, subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows of history.